And really, I think Riverdance highlights the last couple of chapters, the chapters 11 and 12, which is the importance of television for the development of Irish music industry, and how somebody like Louis Walsh, again, somebody you wouldn't really associate with DIY. I think you use the word, the word is Svengali. When people talk about Louis Walsh and Boyzone, there's always a kind of, an element of, we think about maybe fakeness, and not at all. Not at all. These are really hardworking people, and who really basically took advantage of the stage, what television meant at that stage for Irish and British audiences. So Boyzone, I mean, I was looking at what you were saying, and I was saying, could this be a recipe for low-cost marketing? Could this be a model for low-cost marketing? Because you actually said that the band, basically to put them in place, it cost them 52,000 pounds sterling, which is not a very large amount of money considering the revenue this band generated. So yes, maybe you'd like to talk a little bit about Louis Walsh expertise in that in this area.
Well, our boy bands, which were incredibly successful as exports. Now, America, again, it's interesting that America wasn't that receptive to our boy bands. There are probably reasons for that. The American audience demands a certain type of presentation that I think Boyzone and later Westlife didn't have. But they were incredibly successful pretty much everywhere else, and incredibly successful in Asia, in continental Europe, in Britain. But this idea that's very interesting, that you mentioned the word fakeness, that sometimes these bands are seen as they're fake because they're manipulated, and they're just designed by someone who knows how to manipulate an audience. But behind Boyzone and behind Westlife, there was a lot of hard graft by young people who just had an idea that I'd love to be famous, I'd love to be on stage, I'd love people to see me, I might have something to offer, I might have the background, the skills, the drive, the enterprise to get myself noticed, with the intention of later signing a record deal. And because of the nature of the relationship between music and television, which changes, it fluctuates. They come back to the early 1980s, MTV comes along, and it completely transformed the landscape. Bands that had an image, bands that had a good video, tended to thrive. Bands that were no longer dependent on radio. So it was that era of image rock, and very, very innovative. So sometimes bands that may not have been live acts could have a huge hit in the States. So that was a really interesting time. And then MTV loses its influence as a tastemaker in the music industry because it leverages what the gifts it's got from the music industry: free videos, access to bands, and then it goes into reality TV. But the idea of reality TV then comes back into the music industry in a different way, with the talent shows, with the X Factor, with Britain's Got Talent. And it's really, really important to acknowledge that someone like Louis Walsh, who didn't have the funds, didn't have the reputation, didn't have the contacts in Britain to make it at that moment, he was able to leverage the skills, reputation, history that he had in the Irish music industry to get a deal, to find a partner with a major label that was based in Dublin at that time. And that's really important. And he was very, very clear from the get-go This was an Irish Take That. Take That were huge and have continued. And it'll be interesting to think about how much money have Take That and everything that spiraled from Take That. How much has that generated for the British economy? We were absolutely not in the boy band game at that moment. We had the Bachelors in the 1960s, who were kind of a man boy band, a cover band. Got to number one in Britain, so they were very significant. But we didn't have anything in terms of the, what's seen as the classic all singing, all dancing, all smiling, charismatic boy band. And it was because of a guy called Paul Keogh was the Polygram representative, and he just thought, you know what, this could work. And he'd come from a background of working in the alcohol industry, and he had famously given out a whole load, allegedly, a container's worth of free beer at the Trinity Ball. He parked the van and pretended that it was left unlocked by accident. And what a student's going to do with an unlocked van full of beer? They're going to take it. And Budweiser had been seen, according to his recollection, as a kind of a cheap, weak beer. And he thought, if I can get a whole load of people waking up after the Trinity Ball with hangovers from drinking Budweiser, it can change the perception. And, allegedly, he felt that happened. So he's bringing that type of savvy. And Louis Walsh is bringing a long career into show bands, but also a huge love of soul music. We sometimes pigeonhole people in their lane. Okay, he's from show band, so he must like Big Tom and country music. But maybe there's more to them. Maybe they're just pragmatic. So they think, okay, the show band genre tolerates this amount of innovation, so I'll just keep doing that. But he was able to bring a lifetime of that kind of hand-to-hand combat that DIY activity entails. And then Polygram Ireland funded it, and then Polygram in Britain, who you would think would be very, very thankful, they were really upset. And Polygram Ireland and Louis Walsh funded some activity in Britain to establish Boyzone, because Polygram in the UK, in their own market, wouldn't. And it was only when they became very, very popular that that any of them were able to say, "Oh yeah, well done, Paul, thanks for doing that." Mm-hmm. But the implied was, don't do it again, because you're in Ireland, and the Irish people who work in the Irish offices for the major labels, you're just meant to sell Shakira records and Springsteen records. Your job is to market the products that we tell you to. It's not really to develop or nurture or invest in local talent. So again, Boyzone are probably the second most dangerous case study in there, because it probably can't be done now.